Well, hi friends. As I mentioned earlier in the service, today we're going to have a brief quarterly finance update. This is something we do regularly as part of the life of our church. And so I have with me Mike from 5 p.m, Ruth from 9:30, and Logan from 9:30. You, if you're a regular, will probably know these guys very well. This is a really fitting time as we've been looking at 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 these last 2 weeks, which are some of the more significant passages of the Bible that talk about giving. So, Logan, why don't we start with you wearing your treasurer hat? Why don't you give us an update about where things are at with our offertories?
Thank you, Steve. So, let's go back. So we plan our giving needs to be $175,000 per year for 2021. And that brings us to $3,366 per week. Now, what we have achieved so far is we've got year-to-date giving is $142,000, and then we budgeted that it will be $124,000. So we have a surplus about $17,000. Now, Ruth will talk about why we still need to give more for the church. But simply, I wanted to say, like, if you could review your regular giving, and update your direct debit. So if you're giving on electronically, and also reinstate if your direct debit has stopped or if you have never started. So this time of the year, maybe it's time to think about updating that. And I want to ensure one thing to you, that all your records are confidential. So none of the parish members and even our minister knows about your details about how much you give.
Thanks, Logan. And you mentioned there, Ruth. So, Ruth, you're involved on our finance committee as one of our wardens. Do you want to fill in a little bit more info about where things are at?
Sure. So it's great news, as Logan said, that we are not only reaching what we budgeted for congregational giving thus far this year, but we're also a little bit ahead. But as I've said before, and we've all said before when we've got up and given financial reports, we need to keep in mind that just because we're ahead, we shouldn't slow down or stop or think we're doing okay and we can just ride it out now. One of a few challenges have been this year is that we also budgeted for additional income to come in from our property, which hasn't happened because of COVID. And that was in the realm of something like $6,000. We've also had a few additional expenses around the property, including a few development things that we need to do. That's cost more money than we thought. So things change during the year. And so although we're in a good position, and that's great news, we also need to make sure that we keep in mind that even some of our staff are still supported by external funding. So we need to be really careful not to get too complacent that we're doing really well. Whereas we start budgeting for next year and into the future, it would be great if you could review how much you're giving, and if you could increase it if possible, then that would be great.
Yeah, and to, I suppose, add to Ruth's point, now is a really helpful time to be thinking about that reviewing as well, because we're looking at the budget for next year already and starting to think about what ministries God will be able to do here at St. Paul's. And we really are changing modes as a parish council, really, as we think about budgeting, moving from a kind of what can we afford in this year kind of mode, really, to thinking through, well, what are the best ministry focuses, and how can we fund those for the kind of next 2, 3, even 5 years. We want to be making sure that there is funding available in the short term and the long term, so that we start ministries and can sustain them. So the encouragement is, as you give, to think about not just the things for this year, but also the ministries for many years to come.
We might pause it there, and I'm going to invite people, if you have more questions, to email Logan. And Logan, your email should be on the screen for people to see. They can frantically jot down. But I wanted to say 3 really brief things to each of us, really, myself included. The first, so I think you should be really encouraged about, firstly, the work that our finance committee puts in. These guys labour in unseen ways each week at great cost to themselves. And also be encouraged that the story of where we're at as a church, it's really quite a significant moment that we are in a position after a long time, actually, that we can forecast a few years out. And that comes, secondly, I think, with a challenge to each of us, like Mike mentioned, to really prayerfully and intentionally consider how we might contribute to the work of the gospel in this place and as part of this church that we all love. So let me leave that with you and leave that invitation to contact Logan. But finally, I would love to just read these really famous words that Paul wrote to the Corinthians when he was speaking to them about very similar things. We looked at these 2 weeks ago from 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich.